Hi, I've been following Jordan Peterson's videos for some time now, and it's via those that I came across Pastor Paul Vanderklay of the Christian Reformed Church in North America. I use the broad term North America because, for historic reasons, the Christian Reformed Church has a single administration called a synod, covering both the USA and Canada. And for clarity, the Christian Reformed Church is of the Calvinist tradition within Protestantism, within Christianity, which is itself a sect of Judaism. Boy, we humans are good at tribalizing and making life complicated, aren't we? Anyway, Paul has things in common with Peterson. He is knowledgeable, he's well read, he's passionate, and actually has a more ready sense of humour than Jordan. This makes Paul very engaging, just what you want in a member of the clergy. I was going to say that Paul Vanderklay is a supporter of Jordan Peterson, but I think he may want that to be more nuanced. He sees a lot of useful and inspirational things in what Peterson says, and enjoys, without always agreeing, Peterson's take on biblical themes and texts. He has set up a Jordan Peterson discussion group in his hometown of Sacramento, California, which explores biblical, moral, ethical, and archetypal ideas brought to the fore by Peterson's videos. Paul has made numerous videos on Jordan Peterson, using Peterson's biblical lectures to explore in more depth the ins and outs of Christian life from, naturally and mostly, but not exclusively, Calvinist perspective. He quotes a lot of C.S. Lewis, who wasn't a Calvinist, for example. He's also made some videos for more internal church consumption with various guests discussing different issues within the Christian Reformed Church. But I find them interesting even though I'm an old English Church of England Christian. The most recent was a 4-way YouTube video which, among other things, featured a discussion about getting back to what Scripture tells us about everyday life and politics, and it's this topic I want to reach out to Paul about, and of course anyone else who's interested in this YouTube video. So the idea was that we need to go back to Scripture to inform our lives and politics. Now, of course, excuse me one moment, I've got a bit of a frog in the throat. Sorry about that. Now, of course, the Bible, Old and New Testaments, were written in, of, and for their time. An obvious example is that slavery isn't condemned but seen as normal. It's seen as a given because it was normal back then. Jesus is not quoted as clearly condemning it, which he could easily have done. Neither does Paul or any of the other New Testament writers condemn slavery. So when we say we need to go back to Scripture to decide our views on everyday life and political issues now in 2018, we're in a bit of danger. Because what we tend to do is to see what we want to in Scripture. And if our pre-held views aren't directly mirrored in Scripture, what do? Well, we find ways of reading it into Scripture, what we think we read it into Scripture, by inferring it from other things in Scripture or interpreting what was really meant if put in present-day social context. So, if Jesus was here now, what he would mean by this is, and then we basically go in to reinforce whatever sort of religio-political view we've already decided upon. So, to continue with the slavery example, and of course I'm not in favour of slavery, we say, well, of course, Jesus would have been against slavery. But it's not in Scripture, is it? It's not in the Gospels, it's not in the letters. So we've simply interpreted what we think, or what it suits us to think Jesus would say if he came back to earth now. It's a moral given. Anti-slavery is a moral given now. It's normal now for us to think in those terms. So that's how we interpret an issue which, in fact, is slightly jarring with actual direct Scripture. So this view that Jesus would be anti-slavery is, by definition, opinion not taken direct from Scripture. And there's a whole slew of modern day issues that Scripture simply doesn't talk about. Unemployment, for example. Another example is the environment, global warming, etc. So any view Christians come to on these topics cannot be based purely and directly on a scriptural reading, merely on what we decide Jesus would have said based on our preformed religio-political views of 2018. And of course, it's incredibly difficult to be genuinely open-minded and try to interpret Scripture with no tainting by our current thinking, philosophy, morals, and political views. Almost impossible, I would say, certainly for me. So, a video from you, Paul, on how to interpret Scripture on modern-day topics that are not covered or are ambiguously covered directly in Scripture would be great. Moving on to another topic quickly, I would ask you also to consider undertaking a video on a thorny topic that us non-clergy Christians who haven't studied this find difficult. Namely, how do we explain the differences and contradictions in the Gospels? You have touched on this once or twice in some of your videos, but not gone into it in detail. So how do we believe all that is written when we know that the Gospels were written in some instances 60 or more years after Jesus' death? And it's questionable the extent to which the Gospels were written by an actual disciple of Jesus rather than people remembering what disciples told them. We all know from courts of law that witnesses don't always remember exactly correctly what they claim to have seen. So, if we can't answer these obvious questions, these obvious or apparent contradictions, and do that in a serious, sensible, and believable, pun intended, believable way, then the atheist argument that it's a load of made-up mumbo-jumbo is easy to make and hard to refute. But if we can explain these things in a sensible and believable way, then that message needs to be put out there in an accessible and readily available way, into not just the wider Christian community, but into wider, mainly atheistic, into a wider, mainly atheistic society. Excuse me. And Paul, your YouTube videos strike me as being one excellent way of doing this. So, Paul, you do great work, great videos, and are clearly learned in Christian theology, and also have the common touch, passion, and sense of humour, and so forth, that draws people to listen to you and to like you, as I do. So I would ask you to continue using those gifts and your knowledge to educate me and other lay Christians via YouTube, please. Think of these videos as your equivalent of Jordan Peterson's theological lectures, maybe. His are from a psychological viewpoint mainly, and a psychological and archetypal viewpoint. Yours would be obviously and are from a theological viewpoint. Keep helping us answer the basic critiques of Christianity that the atheists throw around every day. And between you and Jordan Peterson and others, I think there is an opportunity now to bring some humility and spirituality back into this harsh, polarized, mainly atheistic world that we seem to be living in. So keep up the great work, Paul, and I look forward when you have time to more YouTube videos. Thanks very much.